hit the record button, and get us started. Give me 1 second just to get a technical thing figured out. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing space with us tonight. As many people know, we're going to be talking about utility justice and specifically rate cases here in the United States. But I did want to take one moment before we get started to just talk about how difficult this moment is for a lot of us. And thank you all, especially for being here during a time when a lot of us are being weighed heavily on by the siege currently happening in Gaza and the situation in the Middle East right now. And it seems especially important to hold space for Gaza as we talk about how critical it is for all people to have access to basic human rights like clean water and electricity. And we just want to thank everyone for taking time out of their days to focus on this issue. We know it's a hard time for people to be talking about work domestically. And our small team at LittleSis has been working hard to hold all of our elected officials accountable, especially those calling for escalated violence. And we want to point you to an event that we are hosting tomorrow. It's another training similar to this one, hosted by our colleague Derek, who's going to be focusing on another power research organization similar to LittleSis, called the National Action Research on the Military Industrial Complex, or NARMIC. That group provided crucial research support for anti-war, anti-nuclear, and anti-apartheid movements in the US between the 60s and 80s. And we're going to be talking about that organization and their role in power research history and the anti-war movement in the US, and what we can learn from that history in this moment. And I'll put the registration link to that event in the chat. It's at noon tomorrow, and we really hope you all can make that. And yeah, thank you again for being with us. I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to talk about the agenda.
All right, thanks so much, Allie. I'm Lauren Parker. I'm a researcher here with LittleSis as well. I'm going to help facilitate tonight. So I'll go through the agenda. I'll also help with the Q&A session. So thank you, everyone. We're here to talk about a new rate case guide put out on our website and with some of our partners. So let's talk through the agenda. I'll give a brief introduction about LittleSis and what we do. We'll also have Allie and Rob talk through this new rate case guide. We'll also have some guest speakers, Elizabeth Marks from Pennsylvania Utility Law Project and Julie Greenberg from Power Interfaith. We'll have a Q&A with all of our panelists and have some audience questions as well. And then we'll move to a closing, and we're hoping to do that all in this hour that we have together. All right, so let's step into it. And I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. Is that right? Okay, great. Excellent. Okay, so LittleSis. LittleSis, we are a watchdog research organization. We specialize in what's called power research and power mapping. So that's really research into powerful organizations and people these people and organizations that hold influence over many of our lives. So we have three main pillars. We offer research like you'll hear tonight from Allie and Rob. We also train organizations and the general public, such as what we're doing tonight, on the ins and outs of power research. And that's really in an effort to work closely with movement partners and build power in our movement. And then we also offer some tech tools. We have LittleSis.org, which if you haven't checked it out, really encourage that. It's a database of powerful people and organizations. It's open source. You can add to it. You can explore a lot of the information in there. And then we also have a tool called Oligrapher. This is a tool that's built on LittleSis that really helps you actually visualize some of those relationships between powerful people, powerful organizations, and make these network maps that you can share out. So yeah, without further ado, maybe I'll pass it to Julie and Liz to give a quick introduction about themselves and their work.
I can give a bio for Julie and Liz first. But first, I'll let Rob introduce himself and give your name and pronouns too.
Hey, thanks, Allie. Hi, everyone. I'm Rob Galbraith. I'm a senior researcher at LittleSis in our state power mapping program. I use he and him pronouns, and I'm based in Buffalo, New York.
Great. And actually, I'll save the longer introductions for before we get into the Q&A, but Julie and Liz, if you could give your name, organization, and pronoun.
I'm Julie Greenberg. I use all pronouns. I'm based in Philadelphia, organizing in southeastern Pennsylvania.
Hi, everyone. Liz Marks, she, her, executive director of the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project. I'm based in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, center of the state. And I think that was all. Thanks.
All right. Well, welcome, Julie and Liz. Thank you so much for offering your time and expertise tonight. We're really excited to have this panel discussion. I think next we'll kind of just jump in. I'll turn it over to Rob and Allie to discuss the rate case guide.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Yeah, just to give a little background on where this project came from. Our rate case guide is actually the second publication in what we've been calling Power Lines, which is sort of a dive into the power of utility companies, primarily electric utilities that are investor owned and are pretty much sort of ubiquitous across the United States. This project really kicked off back in 2021 when we published Power Lines 101, which sort of it set out to be a guide to the power influence of the investor-owned utility industry. So that report kind of presented research analyzing utility corporations' role in local and regional power structures, how utility companies wield political influence using money that is extracted from captive customers. A big source of utility power derives from the fact that they are regulated monopolies in their service area, which gives them a tremendous amount of influence over our lives because their decisions determine our access to things like electrical power, gas for cooking and home heating, water, telecommunications infrastructure, and also from the fact that they are by and large private for-profit companies, meaning that they are guaranteed a monopoly by the government to provide these essential services and are guaranteed a certain amount of profit that comes from rates that we all have to pay. That the initial Power Lines report talked about utilities' role in blocking, delaying, and watering down climate progress, and featured some case studies from different community organizations across the United States that have organized against power monopolies and started building power for energy democracy. You can find the initial sort of report on utility industry power at powerlines101.org. And that website also has some of those case studies that I was talking about, as well as links to resources from other organizations who have sort of taken on challenging utility industry power, either at a regional level or nationwide.
Yeah, and so after Powerlines 101, which Rob just talked about, in the past year or so, Rob and I have been talking about what else we think might be necessary to write something on that could help activists hold their utility corporations accountable in their city or state. And both of us have had some experience with what we call rate cases in the past. I worked on a water justice campaign in Pittsburgh that was an intervener in a rate case there, and was able to get a lot of wins for ratepayers and residents in Pittsburgh. And Rob has done similar work in Buffalo. And we were talking about it and said, rate cases are a little bit hard to understand for average electric utility users, but they're an amazing way for people to get involved and actually make a huge difference in the pocketbooks and energy policy of their city. It's a great way to get people mobilized around climate change, around housing affordability. And we decided to focus on rate cases as one primary way that people can intervene in their cities or states' politics. And so the Powerlines 102 report, A Guide to Challenging Electric Utility Rate Hikes, is a report that talks about first, like, what is a rate case? Who are the parties involved? What can you win? What is the Public Utility Commission? What does that look like in different states? I'll talk briefly about the first part of it, and then I'll kick it over to Rob, and then we'll get into a bigger discussion. But essentially, Rob talked about it a little bit, but essentially what a rate case is most or all private utilities are regulated by the state Public Utility Commission, sometimes called something different in each state, but essentially private utilities are what we call regulated monopolies. And because they're a monopoly and people don't really have a choice between what utility they go with usually, the trade-off there is that they can only raise prices with approval from the state. And that means they have to go through these regular rate cases where they basically make their case to state commissioners as to why they need to raise rates or change policies that other private companies don't typically need to do if they want to raise their prices. And in that rate case, it's like a quasi-judicial proceeding. There are a lot of parties that file to intervene or petition to intervene, and regular citizens, ratepayers of that utility, anyone who can be impacted by that utility's rate hike, can also file to intervene. So it's a great way for average people to get involved and make a big difference for everyone that is covered by that utility. And these utilities, as Rob said, are extremely powerful entities in a lot of cities in the United States, a lot of states. And taking them on in this, one way can make a big difference, not just in your city, but in your state in general. Oftentimes we see utility corporations spend the most on campaign contributions in a state, spend the most on lobbying in a state. So you really are challenging directly a corporation that's some of the most powerful corporations in the United States. And you'll be party to this rate case with a lot of other powerful organizations, some state agencies, maybe some local businesses or large businesses that are also intervening in rate cases. And of course, you'll be at the table with the utility themselves and their lawyers. And you'll be, presenting regular people's case as to why electric utility rate hikes are bad for everyday working families. You'll be presenting that argument to the Public Utility Commission. And we go a little bit into detail around the Public Utility Commission and what that is in each state. Oftentimes, people on the Public Utility Commission, the commissioners, have close ties to the utility industry, the energy industry, and usually, not always, they are appointed by the governor or the legislature in some way and have connections to powerful politicos in every state. And we really see these utilities use their connections to PUC commissioners and their legal team to kind of put their thumb on the scale when it comes to these rate cases, and use campaign contributions, lobbying, and other sorts of revolving door pressure on public utility commissioners to allow them to raise rates at a scale that is often unnecessary. And we've seen historically in the past few decades, utilities have been raising rates at a rate that is not consistent with keeping up an effective and useful utility for average people. We've seen a lot of crises like in Detroit and in Texas, where utility companies have failed to invest in their system appropriately. And that leaves people without power for days at certain times, and all while they're facing intense rate hikes that makes housing even more unaffordable. And I'll turn it over to Rob to talk more about the second half of the report.
Thanks, Ellie. Yeah. So I think one of the real kind of motive forces behind putting this report together was the fact that utilities can be this site for really horrendous profit extraction, but the fact that first, that like Ellie said, that utilities need to engage with this public process in order to raise their rates, in order to try to pull more money out of our communities. That, coupled with the fact that every single person pretty much can probably relate some sort of negative experience with their electric utility company. Sort of those two factors kind of combine together to make these electric rate cases, I think, a really great opportunity for organized communities to start to fight back and to kind of make a stand against this kind of profiteering. And I think, maybe even more importantly, against corporate power over the public sphere more generally. Because I think, issues of power outages, of really sort of punitive extractive rates charged for really essential services. I think those things kind of combine to create a lot of anger that the sort of the way utilities are set up and regulated in the United States gives a great venue for, I think, sort of mobilizing people, and a platform to organize people to think more critically about the role that utility companies play in our lives, and to start to analyze the roles that utility companies play in areas that we're not used to thinking of them, whether it's by exerting influence over our politics, over important local institutions. So what we've tried to do here with this rate case guide is to talk through ways that that people can sort of take advantage of this process. So in the second section of the report, we start by looking at a few different ways that people can sort of get involved in rate cases. I think the biggest and probably like the most important and like the most effective, if you can organize to pull it off, is by becoming, as Ellie said, an intervener in a rate case, which means that you and your organization have actually become a party to this judicial proceeding, which allows you to do all sorts of things, like requesting documents from the utility company, submitting testimony and examining witnesses. But there are some other ways that you can get involved, even if maybe you are not ready to sort of seek that intervener status, which I think does require a certain amount of a certain degree of resources and technical expertise to sort of like most effectively sort of prosecute that kind of a case. But even if you're not intervening in a rate case, there are still lots of opportunities for the public to become involved in the process, either by submitting comments, or I think really most critically, in at least in the cases that I've worked on, by showing up, by urging regulators to set aside time and spaces for public hearings, and then to turn out, show up to those hearings and mobilize and explain explain exactly what the impacts that as utilities planned rate hikes will have on your community. We also talk about some of the things that you can win in a rate case, and these will vary from case to case depending on what the utility company says they need money for, what they said they're going to spend this new money on. But in addition to just blocking, or more likely just significantly reducing the rate hike that a utility can get, we've seen communities win things like investments in renewable energy, or investments in infrastructure. We see this a lot in cities like Buffalo and Detroit, where utilities sort of underinvest in infrastructure in communities that they're used to getting away with stuff in communities where people may have been sort of systematically disenfranchised, deprived of power. By organizing in a rate case, you can start to compel some of those really needed investments as well. We also talk through some other tactics for kind of bringing a fight over rate hikes out of this very technical playing field within a rate case, where everything is overseen by an administrative law judge, and then your public utility or public service commission kind of at a higher level. Because utilities are sort of publicly facing, sort of consumer facing corporations, they are and because utility regulators are public officers who are appointed by government officials, or else even elected themselves. By bringing the issues that are coming to light in a rate case outside of this sort of courtroom or conference room setting, into the streets, into places where the utility company was with their armies of lawyers and technical experts are not expecting to be facing opposition, we found that can be a really powerful way to sort of to move the needle and to sort of correct some of these power imbalances that we see, because community organizations generally do not have the same types of resources, like access to attorneys, lawyers, technical experts that the utility company does. But what community groups can do is move lots of people. So things that we've seen that have worked really well are sort of large public rallies and marches to the site of comment hearings, working smartly to get lots of members of a community, whether it's particular neighborhoods or even citywide, to write comments and submit testimony to utility regulators, talking about what a rate hike means, or what underinvestment in utility infrastructure means for that community. Other things like publishing op-ed columns or letters to the editor, to sort of bring the fight over utility rates outside of this again very sort of technical quasi judicial arena, and connect these fights more closely to the people and the places where the outcomes are really most strongly felt.
Thanks, Rob. And I'm going to hand it over to our guest speakers now. I'm going to introduce you both first and then turn it over to Liz and then Julie to talk a little bit about your work, and then we'll get into a Q&A. But first, Elizabeth is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project, or PULP, a statewide specialty legal services project of regional housing legal services, where she works to secure energy and utility justice for Pennsylvanians experiencing poverty through community-driven policy advocacy, litigation, and education. And Julie is the Director of Climate Justice and Jobs at Power Interfaith in Philadelphia, where she leads a campaign focused on PECO, the electric utility serving Philadelphia. She grew up in the civil rights movement in the 1960s in Washington, D.C. and Mississippi, where she formed a lifelong commitment to building a world free of racism, sexism, and economic oppression. She was trained in organizing in the feminist movement of the 1970s and in the movement for a new society in 1977 into the 80s. Since then, she has lived in Philadelphia for 35 years, where she raised 5 children. Julie has served as a rabbi of a Center City congregation for more than 2 decades and also teaches classes on systems thinking, diversity and equity, and organizational development at the Council for Relationships. Since Power's founding, Julie has worked in a variety of roles and currently leads Power's climate, jobs, and justice work and organizes money to sustain Power's mission. And I want to thank you both so much again for joining us, and I'm excited to lift up some of the amazing work that you both do. So I'll turn it over to you, Liz.
Well, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here and share space with all of you. I know Allie and I was her attorney many years ago in the lead crisis in Pittsburgh. And she, together with my organization, the Utility Law Project, we pushed for some amazing reforms in the city of Pittsburgh to clean up the water. And we're here to talk about electricity. And there's a lot of parallels. We were just, it's on my mind because we were kind of chatting before this. And I think, the water work, the energy work, it is all necessary and important to the mission of the Utility Law Project, my organization, which works to secure just and equitable access, right? Access to safe and affordable utility services. We work on behalf of Pennsylvanians experiencing poverty, and Ali already said we're part of the Pennsylvania Legal Aid Network. We're a bit of a unicorn. There aren't many organizations like ours working exclusively in utility affordability on behalf of anybody experiencing poverty, right? There are a handful of organizations scattered across the country that have been doing this utility intervention work for years. And PULP was created almost 40 years ago out of the gas crisis when people could no longer afford the oil to heat their home. There was a real serious issue, and accountability had run amok at the utility commissions. And so the Utility Law Project was born and we have been litigating, we have been educating, we've been advocating for access to affordable utilities for a very long time. But it's only in recent years that we've taken on a broader scope to not only be looking at economic justice and looking at our utility access and affordability work through the lens of economic justice, but also through the lens of racial justice, where there are deep and systemic inequities in access to energy and water, to clean energy and clean water. And there are deep and systemic issues that we have to address. Things you wouldn't even think of, like the use of algorithms to schedule utility terminations. It can often, whether or not you'll be terminated based on your utility debt could vary more more based on who your neighbor is and how much they owe more than how much you owe. And that's a problem, and that's systemic racism. And that is the kind of thing that you can address in a rate case. So, I know we'll get into that some with the question and answer, but I just want to say, we do a ton of hyper local work in partnership, in coalition with agencies and organizations that are embedded in communities across Pennsylvania. We train advocates and social workers and healthcare providers and housing providers on how to identify utility insecurity and identify solutions to solving utility insecurity and responding in their communities. But the bulk of our work, and the reason that Allie invited me, is because we litigate these large scale utility rate cases on behalf of the clients we serve. And so, we represent a number of community groups over the years, but we most frequently represent a group called the Coalition for Affordable Utility Services and Energy Efficiency in Pennsylvania, which is a mouthful, but for short, it's COSPA. And they are a group of really tenacious, Black-led organization of clients and former clients of legal services. So they may not be currently experiencing poverty, but they have been there and experienced poverty and understand it from a way that you can't understand it if you haven't lived it. And so this group of folks from across our state, we pull together, they work in coalition together, and we advise them and they advise us, right? They tell us what to do in these cases. They tell us the issues that are coming up in their communities, and we're able to bring that to light. And the reason I went down a little path with you on our local work with community organizations is because that is how we build membership of COSPA. It's how COSPA gets their members, right? It is serving the community and their needs. And then we are able to take that, what we learn in our education efforts and our advocacy efforts, and bring it into the courtroom. We can translate that for the communities we're representing. And, I'll just give you one, for instance, and I know we'll get into a lot more examples, but Rob mentioned, what can you get, right? Well, you can get things that really affect communities. And the one example I'll give, the last couple years, we've been working really closely with immigrant resettlement organizations and advocacy groups. And we've identified a number of utility policies, both in terms of identification requirements in order to even set up service, right? You have to have a state issued ID. Well, that becomes a problem. And you also you can't read your bill if it's not in the language that you speak. You also can't read a termination notice if it's not in the language you speak. You can't even get customer service to set up an account if you cannot access service in a language that you speak. So in working with immigrant communities, we identified some of these issues, brought them into utility rate cases. Why? Because that's where terms, conditions, and quality of service issues are all litigated. It's a complex process. And the last thing I'll say is it is needlessly complex, and it's complex by design, right? They use a lot of really confusing terms like cost allocations, and they come in a box. My first day at the utility law project a little over a decade ago, a utility filed a rate case, and 10 years ago, everything was still on paper, and they delivered it in a banker's box, right? That was the case. They bury you in paper so that you cannot, and now it's online and they're all electronic, so you can do search and find of these filings, but they are dense filings. They use language that is hard to understand. And, you can, though, break down those barriers and understand it, because again, it's by design. And I would say I don't know if I'm supposed to give advice, but what I'll tell you is find somebody like my organization and partner with them so they can help you translate some of this stuff and navigate it together. You can do it without an attorney. You can do it just calling up the utility law project. We'll give you some advice. There are other organizations I think we're going to talk a little bit about through question and answer about who can provide you that kind of technical assistance to navigate this stuff. But the point is, you got to be on the other side, taking down that power and standing up to that power, and making sure that we can, move policy together. So that's a spiel, I suppose, but I'll yield there. Turn it back to you, Allie.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Liz. That was a really great example of things you might not think about you could win in a rate case. And yeah, we will definitely get into more, but I appreciate you offering resources for people. I think it's immensely helpful. And I will turn it over to Julie now to talk about the campaigning in Philadelphia.
Thank you, Allie. I first of all just want to say I'm so proud to be in the trenches with both LittleSis and with Pulp, and just feel like we are building an extraordinary web of people working on these issues in different lanes collectively. Power Interfaith, it's a multiracial, faith-filled movement in the state of Pennsylvania for racial and economic justice on a livable planet. And we are addressing on our climate justice and jobs team the existential threat to humanity of climate crisis intersecting with a world of extreme inequality. We organize in Pennsylvania, but this is an issue, climate crisis and extreme inequality, that everyone everywhere needs to address. And climate crisis is a poor people's issue because it hurts everybody. It creates extreme weather, flooding, fires, smoke, all the things that we're seeing all over the world, extreme heat, extreme cold. But it also hits people who have the least resources to face the threat the most. And so when our team started looking around, first of all, we talked about what we could do about this. We had thousands of conversations across southeastern Pennsylvania, and we talked to people about, well, how do you see these issues? What do you need? We were putting our gaze, really, we were looking at utilities because we knew we didn't have massive power yet to affect the legislature. And utilities are a big part, especially energy utilities, are a big part of the entire energy system and can do a lot to address climate crisis and inequality. They can't do everything. Some things are needed through the legislature, and we are building power to be able to choose our champions and win things in that way. And it's not that there's no connection between energy utilities and the legislature, because of course, the PUC regulates the utilities, and the governor nominates the 5 people who sit on the PUC, and the Senate has to confirm them. So there is some big political relationship there. But we looked at utilities, energy utilities, because we knew that the world needs to turning from burning. We need to turn away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy. And we need to do it in a way that does not burden the people already most burdened the most in that transition. So when we had these thousands of conversations, our team was able to create a set of what we call energy democracy values that we operate by, and we choose our campaigns based on these values. Energy democracy framework, meaning people who have to use this energy need to have a voice in shaping the solutions. Our communities need to be part of the solution. And we need to build solutions that integrate affordability, renewability, fair labor, health, and safety. We can't have one of those without the other one of those. We need energy that's affordable, because of course, we have to be able to buy our energy and be able to afford it. And everybody needs to be able to use energy. It's a human right. But also, if that energy is based on fossil fuels, that is just circling right back to harm us and destabilize our planet and our communities and our lives. So we need affordable, renewable energy. And then we have to make sure that the workers who are in the fossil fuel economy can still have livelihoods and protections during that transition, and that there be a very robust green energy economy that includes everybody this time, not including the Black, brown, marginalized immigrant people who were left out of the fossil fuel economy and weren't even in a lot of those unions. So this time that workforce development has to include everybody. And finally, the health and safety issues are crucial along the way. So we're looking for solutions that integrate those values, at least integrate a couple of them at a time, not abandoning any of them. And so we're especially excited when we can build a campaign that both addresses affordability and renewability, or affordability and good green jobs. Or we find an intersection between the values, the goals in the solutions that we're working for. So we have two big energy justice campaigns focused on two completely different kinds of utilities. One is focused on PGW, which is the biggest municipally owned gas utility in the nation. It serves 500,000 people in Philadelphia. And it's publicly owned, but it's like a dinosaur. It's business as usual every single step of the way. And then we also work in our People's Energy Plan campaign on PECO, which is an investor-owned utility, a privately owned utility, and is an electric utility. So there's a lot of complexity amongst those four things, whether it's gas or electric, whether it's municipally owned or privately owned. I could say a lot more about that. But I'll just talk for one more minute, because I probably don't have much more time than that, about an issue cut that addresses the integrated connection between those values. Right now, we're working on, it's not exactly a rate case, it's actually an energy procurement case that has a lot to do with the cost of energy with PECO. PECO has to procure the least cost energy. And they've never taken into account climate crisis as one of the costs that people experience when you use fossil fuel energy, in terms of health, in terms of extreme weather and heat and cold and community destabilization. So we have fought on that question as legal interveners in situations, and also just organizing people across the service area, clergy people, elected leaders, consumers of energy. We're organizing many, many people to come in. Often in these cases, especially in the PGW situation, we're the only public in the public input hearings, and we've had to fight for the hearings. These utilities don't want the public in the hearings. We've had to win these hearings. And then we organize, we show up in full force with lots and lots of different kinds of people telling the stories. And every 4 years, PECO has to propose a new energy procurement plan. And we're contesting over least cost, because if you assume there's going to be a gas future, and gas is very volatile, so you would only have contracts that last 2 years. But if you're looking for a renewable energy future, all the contracts need to be long-term contracts, because all renewable energy requires upfront investment. Nobody's going to build a wind turbine or a solar array where all the cost is at the beginning and you need financing and everything for that, if you don't have a contract that says someone's going to buy that energy for like the next 10 years. And actually, if PECO had been using long-term contracts in this last period, energy would have been cheaper, because gas is very, very volatile. And if you're assuming the future is all based on gas, of course, you only want a 2-year contract, which precludes renewable energy, because all renewable energy needs long-term contracts. So we are in there fighting in this next round, which will take place in 2024, to win long-term contracts. And that affects the cost of energy. So we're trying, it's a sweet cut of the issue at the intersection of affordability and renewability. And if we have time, we've also just been through with Liz side by side, a couple different PGW cases, both a rate case and also fighting something else that has both climate and affordability aspects to it. So that's a really good campaign, can integrate affordability and renewability. And many times also green workforce development. So and of course, all of that affects health. So there's just like, that's what we're doing. We're looking for ways to build strategic campaigns and then win them in a way where we have enough power to actually transform something, even as we build a bigger movement that will create bigger transformation and not just mini wins along the way. And there's so much more to say, and maybe there will be time to talk about more of this together.
Go ahead, Lauren.
All right, I was probably sorry to jump in here, but I really appreciate everything that you offered, Julie and Liz. Thank you so much. I would love to just spend more time hearing so much about your campaigns. But so just to move us right to the Q&A, and in service of all folks who are attending tonight, just wanted to ask, do any attendees have any questions? If you do, feel free to use the Q&A button. I saw that one already got answered, so thank you, Rob, for answering that question. Yeah, if you have a question, please put it in that Q&A chat box, and we'll try to get to it up, in the lineup. All right, and until we have a question there, maybe we'll just move on to our list. So first thing that I wanted to just dig a little bit deeper into was just thinking about the various actors in a rate case. So Allie, you touched on this, Julie, you touched on this, Liz, you touched on this, can we, just so that we can really crystallize this, who are kind of the main actors and what are their interests? We talked about, these corporate utilities. I think we can all be in agreement that one of their primary interests is around deriving profit. So can we kind of tease that out a little bit, and where there are some competing interests, just kind of go into that? I don't know if Allie, if you'd like to start there, or kind of pass it to Julie and Liz.
Yeah, I can start, and then if anyone has anything to add, I will say we try to give you a full rundown in this Powerlines 102 report of what all the different interests are at the table. Obviously, like Lauren said, the utility is interested in making profit. They have shareholders that they need to answer to at the end of the day. They're private, oftentimes publicly held utilities, meaning they have a duty, in fact, to return shareholders their profits. And you'll also see industrial customers, commercial customers, like big manufacturers that use a lot of electricity will sometimes file and intervene or have groups file on their behalf. You'll see agencies similar to what Pulp does, but that work for the state that represent small businesses or sometimes customers. You'll see nonprofits like Pulp or smaller base building groups intervene on behalf of ratepayers. And I think that is a lot of what we talk about in the report, but I'll turn it over to Liz or Julie to talk about any other parties that you've experienced.
The only other party I'll mention is that, and this is going to vary by state, but often a utility commission has their own investigatory arm that will also intervene. In Pennsylvania, it's the Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement, and they're supposed to represent all interests, right? And to balance those interests. So they're not only looking out for the utility to make sure the utility has enough funding for operations and maintenance and all, the necessities to run their operation. They're also looking out for consumers of all types. And so that's a really broad charge and really hard to strike a balance. And so it depends on who's running that kind of department, and it'll look different in every utility commission. We have a very large commission in Pennsylvania, 600 employees, overseeing over 1,000 different utilities, 17 of which are the large gas and electric in our state. So it becomes a machine, and again, it really depends on the bent, right, of those folks, what they are weighing when they're representing all consumers. And I'll also say sometimes, even our friends that are in these cases, we can disagree on things. The hope is we can take those disagreements offline and come up with a solution. But sometimes there's a balance, right? And when you have to figure out how to navigate that. And Julie and I have done that before, right? Taken arguments offline so that we can have that disagreement, because at the end of the day, climate justice and anti-poverty is working towards the same thing, and we don't have to. For a very long time, 20 years plus, we've been fighting each other. Last several years, we've been working to overcome that in these kinds of spaces where competing interests of affordability and renewability are at stake.
Yeah, I want to build on that, really agreeing with Liz that, I mean, one of the powers that be have a vested interest in driving a wedge between the affordability representatives, the renewability representatives, the labor people. Wedge, wedge, wedge. They do not want us to have a strong movement to get people what they need, because that would mean a real change in how these things work. And so one of the strategies that Liz's group and my group take is we're in pretty close alignment, like constant dialogue. Partly it's at the legal level, partly it's at our campaign level, really like learning and talking with each other and making sure that there's not a lot of light between these different things. Like we both care about, what each other is doing a lot. And the same thing we need to do better and better with the labor movement, especially certain parts of it that actually have a shared interest in electrification. Like we really shouldn't be able to be divided and conquered, because we're talking about moving away from burning towards more electrification with the right mix in the grid that makes the electricity, not based on fossil fuels. And the electric workers in particular should be very happy about that, so like we are partnering with certain unions on certain things. Like right now there's a solar for schools bill in our state that has a lot of labor backing, and it certainly has environmental backing as well, because it's about solar energy. So that's when I talk about like looking for issue cuts and integrating these values. It's connected to partnering with the allies where we're really in relationship, we're learning from each other, and we will not be divided.
I really appreciated both of those responses, because the importance of coalition building in these proceedings and in larger sort of utility organizing is something we try to really drive home in our report, that this is an opportunity for lots of different interests that to come together, even in places where they might not be as likely to. So thank you very much.
All right, I'm seeing that we have a couple minutes left. I think we won't get to all of our questions, unfortunately. And I see a couple were answered already in the chat, so thank you for that. I want to ask Julie and Liz, so in this brief time we have together, you did talk a little bit about the ongoing campaigns that you've been working on, some of the challenges and some of the wins. Are there anything else about these campaigns that you really want folks to know about to get energized to join a campaign? What are we up against? What else could we be winning in some of these campaigns?
Wow. I mean, I guess I would say from the organizer's point of view, we need to keep building a base of people who will vote and choose our elected leaders, because so much of this circles back around to depend on what does happen at those levels, both in the city and at the state. So we work with an each one reach one model. People are overwhelmed and people's have lots of things, trying to put the food on the table, get the kids safely home from school, having a livelihood. People have hard lives, and just organizing is hard, but that's what we're doing, is like everybody bringing their people who care about the same thing in and building something strong.
And I would agree with Julie. We can't win in the courtroom without people out on the streets demanding it, right? And I don't mean literal streets, but sometimes I do mean literal streets, but in the boardrooms, right? Showing up. And so, it takes both advocates on the ground, bringing the message forward in the public, and it takes people in the courtroom pushing on these issues from the inside so that we can squeeze it into the middle. And I think, what I'll say is in terms of like some campaigns to look for. We've been starting to work a little bit, right? The early project with Environmental Defense Fund, who's very interested in working with Blacks for Green and some other really great groups to develop a cohort of folks who can be experts in these proceedings of their own experience and how to kind of build what is very technical writing to push for campaigns. And from our perspective, we want more people to be able to understand how you build an affordability program, right? Like, and so, you ask kind of like, and what else can you get out of this, Lauren, in the tail end of that comment? So I'm going to seize on that little piece of your question and say, like, we can build programs that can provide affordability and make utility bills less regressive. Right now, we recover utility costs equally across the board, whether you make $1 million or you make $1,000. Doesn't matter. You're paying the same rates. If you can get into rate cases and make the affordability push, put up the poverty numbers that are in your area, put up what the average energy burden is for customers, put up all of that data and have the stories to back it up so that the commission is knowing what data day in and day out for people that can't access it. You can win tiered kind of assistance programs. You can get improvements to those so that rate affordability doesn't become the barrier to advancing clean energy. There is enough money out there, right? But if we continue to recover bills in this regressive way where everybody's paying in the same amount to support that grid, right, which we all need and we all rely on, even if you have solar on your roof, you still got to be connected to that grid. So we do need it, but do we all need to be paying for it equally or each to their own ability? And that's what we're pushing for, is more equity across the cost recovery mechanisms. And that's how you do it. Rate cases are, like, I went to college, studied economics. I was way into how do we move this, and I had no idea until I stumbled upon this. I was a family lawyer. I worked in domestic violence for 10 years before I worked in utility justice. But where I came across it was in working for economic justice for folks who experienced domestic violence and were transitioning. And you can't have a safe home until you can get utilities set up, right? And so I jumped into this weird world and figured out that this is the place to move economic justice, to move racial justice, and to, get to a more progressive way of recovering the costs that we all need for the things we all need. So sorry if I went on a long rant, but there are half a dozen national organizations, local organizations, more than half a dozen, that could provide that kind of technical assistance and help you build it in your communities so that you can do the same thing.
Thank you both so much. I feel like from what I'm hearing all tonight, it's really underscoring that rate cases can really be this like nexus of labor justice, climate justice, housing affordability, racial and economic justice. So thank you for just really drawing those connections. We can offer maybe one last question for the group here is there any more research that would be really helpful here, that would really help our movements? And we would love to hear from the attendees too. If you have anything, if you want to drop it in the Q&A box, we would love to hear what additional research we could follow up on that would be helpful for you.
I have something that would be really helpful to us. We've tried to find partners to do this. It's actually probably involves big data modeling. So I don't know what the capacity anywhere is. We haven't been able to find someone to do it, but when we first launched our climate justice and jobs team, Power had just put out a report called Black Lives Matter about Black work in Philadelphia jobs. And so the first thing we did was we partnered with a union and we did a report called Green Jobs Matter that was sort of connected to the Black Lives Matter report. Green Jobs Matter, and we had sort of enough capacity through the union's funding of this, not our funding source, to do some real research on what would jobs look like if there was an infusion of resource and solarization and just all of that happening in Philadelphia. We're ready now for another report like that. We need a report about like, well, what would happen and maybe specifically focused on PICO, for instance, like if PICO were to, commit to like, let's say some certain number of long-term contracts for renewable energy, what would that look like for jobs in Pennsylvania? So the connection between renewable energy and jobs. And I don't know if you can even model it because it depends on like, well, we want good jobs. We want jobs with good protections and benefits and, that can support families and whatever. So I guess you'd have to set certain parameters and do it this way and that way and the other way. But like, we're looking for prevailing wage work in these contracts and looking at how this would benefit people who are concerned about jobs. Pretty much all of us.
All right, thank you so much, Julie. And Nancy, I see your comment. Thank you. I hope we can follow up with you. Everybody on the call, please feel free to follow up with us. If you have ideas, questions, we're always willing to talk through that. So I think this might be a nice spot to wrap up the evening. Thank you so much again to our panelists, Julie and Liz, for all of your insight, for all of your expertise and just advocacy on these issues. So appreciated. Thank you to my colleagues here at LittleSis, Allie and Rob, for putting out this incredible report, and for everyone on the call for offering your time tonight. We really appreciate it. So with that, I hope everybody has a great rest of the evening and can stay safe and sound these days.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes. Thanks again, Julie.